Has done an awful lot of research on the early history of the club, and of course wrote this wonderful book on Have You Ever Played Brazil? And we're selling copies today half price, £10, if anyone hasn't got it, and Aidan of course will be willing to sign it, so there's a good opportunity for you today. I'm Martine Weiler, I'm the Secretary of the Exeter City History Group, and we've been set up for just over a year trying to promote the history of the club, to conserve it, to archive it, to record it, and particularly to share it with people. And one of the things we're delighted with is with our partners, the University of Exeter, we managed to get the Heritage Lottery Fund grant to research and then communicate the history of St James's Park. We thought it was a really good time to do it because of the development plans at the ground. So Aidan has been doing some research on the early history of the ground, and what we'll do today, I'm just going to almost do it like a question and answer session with Aidan, but as we go along, if there's things you want to interject, if there's things you know about, or if you've got questions, we'll make it interactive. So Aidan, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you much.
The first thing really, I suppose, is when you think of the modern football ground there, and then go back into the Middle Ages, it was just a field outside the Exeter, the town of Exeter, outside the walls. What have you found out about who owned that field and what happened, years ago on that field before it ever became a football ground?
Okay, well, yeah, it was. Good afternoon. Yeah, it was a field right up until the beginning of the 19th century. So we have reports in the early 1800s of the field. It was called the parish field in the early 1800s, and it was described as being a field near Exeter. So it was remote. So that, I think that's something that's important to say. And it was the origin and the connection with the club really is St Stephen's Church, because at St Stephen's Church it was where an important aristocrat, a woman, part of the Russell family in Exeter, was baptised. Lady Margaret Russell. She was born at Bedford House. Now her daughter was called Lady Anne Clifford. Lady Anne Clifford was a remarkable lady. She was described as, biographers describe her as one of the most notable women of the Stuart era, and she spent a lot of her lifetime in the north of the country. Her father was George Clifford, and he was an advisor to Elizabeth I. The connection with Exeter, Lady Anne Clifford eventually inherited her father's titles and lands, and as one memorial, if you like, she decided to pay tribute to her mother, Lady Margaret Russell, and so she bought land, the field, the remote field. She bought this in 1654. Now we know that she bought it really for St Stephen's Church. So St Stephen set up a trust. It was known as the Lady Anne Clifford Trust. And this trust stated that a part of the rent would be used to pay for the education of a poor boy or girl in the parish of St Stephen's. So there we are. From the mid 16th century, we have this connection, this remote field. it was described as being near St Anne's Church, which obviously is still standing there, and in maps of what the 18th century, we can see how remote it was. You have the walled city of Exeter, you have St Sybil's Street with St Sybil's Church, and then when you get to you've just got St Sybil's Street with a few houses. You've got St Anne's, and you've got nothing. It's just land. Everything is just land around that.
And the St Anne's Church, then the one out on.
That's right. That's right. St Anne's just the one near 50 yards away. Yeah.
Yeah, on the road. Church.
On the corner. Yeah.
Now
exactly.
a Greek Orthodox church.
Usually with a fountain.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So the trustees, my understanding is they lease the land out in 7-year blocks.
That's right.
And the obvious people to lease it out to for much of the time was farmers.
That's right.
And we know about pigs being kept on the pitch. But we understand that caused a bit of a fracas with some of the local population.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're moving ahead in time now. Certainly, yeah, pigs were used, perhaps other animals as well. There were cow sheds here. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So there were actually cow sheds in the 19th century. Certainly, yeah, in the 1880s, and now we're talking, because I think, okay, the chronology. Why St James? We're going to talk about that. St James's Park, because St James's Church. St James's Church. Was consecrated in 1836. Okay, so there was no St James Road. That was built in the 1840s. Right, so in other words, from the 1840s, it's becoming built up, this area. So clearly there are issues for people living near the ground where you're living near animals, really. And so in 1886. There was a meeting of the town council, and the inspector of nuisances gave a report to the market committee saying that no keepers of pigs should be reminded that their land should be distant from houses. But there were exceptions, and one of the exceptions, in other words, to that rule was Bradford's field. Tom Bradford was this land here. And we can. It's implied that clearly there were issues with local residents, because he was asked to take action if ever there if ever residents complained, that there would be immediate action, and that was, we're talking 1886.
And it's interesting. So pigs weren't, and you mentioned cows, weren't the only animals to come here. And I know in the title of this we talk about menageries.
Yeah.
Tell us what you found out about these visiting shows that used this land.
Right. Well, certainly from the 1840s, the late 1840s, there were circuses, menageries. I'm going to make my only quote, and it's a quote from the Western Times, 1892, and I think this describes what a menagerie and what a good description. So it's the Royal Circus and Menagerie. An excellent entertainment is that given by the Royal Circus proprietors, who have pitched their tents in St James Field. Note the name, St James Field. In addition to a menagerie which is instructive as well as entertaining, and which contains some rare animals, some of which are put through startling performances. There are equestrian and trapeze feats by first-rate artists, and the usual number of clowns who keep the audience in a high state of merriment. Lieutenant F. Taylor puts a group of African lions through a sensational performance. The show was well patronised yesterday afternoon. And I think that's what the locals were getting every year from the mid-19th century up until certainly the early 1900s. So menagerie. There were also horse shows as well from about the late 1880s.
We don't want any cheap comments about clowns and circuses. Too easy. So we're getting this picture of a field held in trust to support the poor of the parish.
Of St Stephen's, I mean, not even St Sybil's, so there is that connection is quite important to us.
They're being used by a local pig farmer, visiting circuses coming. So when did sport first start being played, and which sports were played here?
Yeah, well, I think probably cricket was the first sport to be played here. And rugby was being played at the time as well. Exeter Rugby Club was founded in the early 1870s, and they were playing in the Matford area. So I think a lot of rugby was being played in the south of the city. But there were reports of there was an ISCA cricket club in the early 1870s. They held an athletic sports here. We know St Sybil's probably played here as well in the late 1870s, early 1880s. So there was cricket, there was rugby. At the end of the 1880s, the cycling clubs, there were several local cycling clubs. They held meetings at the ground. St Sybil's School held their first annual sports event in 1892 at the ground. But no association football.
I mean, that's interesting, isn't it? We've got a place that's so associated with football, but now, you know, from the 1600s right the way through till nearly the end of the 19th century, it's got nothing to do with football, but it's got its own history and story, and it's one of the things we wanted to bring out.
At one point that my grandfather always reckoned that Buffalo Bill and his wild horseback riders played there, or
Performed.
Probably did, yeah. I mean, we're talking people who...
talk about me as a little boy like cowboys in India, yeah? Buffalo Bill.
Well, some of these shows had played in they played Paris, they toured Europe, they came here and they toured the Southwest.
So, obviously, we know that it's now a football ground. So when did football first get played here, and which teams played here?
Okay, well, association football, as far as I've found, was being played in the Matford Lane area of Exeter, so Topsham Road, Mount Radford, and it came from the schools initially. On one school that was important that still actually the building actually stands, and that's Parkhouse School in St Leonard's Road, and it's remarkable that we can actually see where meetings, the first Exeter club actually took place. We need to say something about, so the first association, there was an Exeter club that was formed, association club, in 1890. It lasted just over a year. And that's because rugby was still the dominant sport here, and it just wasn't catching up association football. 3 years later, 1893, an Exeter Association Football Club. So we have Exeter AFC, 1893. Their first meeting, I think that's significant, was in the Guild Hall. They got permission of the mayor to hold a meeting there. And at that meeting, there was a member of the company that owned the county ground. I think that was always going to be a non-starter because they wanted Saturdays for games, and the county ground, obviously rugby was being played there. We know that then, so 1893, we know that the club then formed a committee, and that owners of fields were interviewed. So perhaps the Clifford Trust were interviewed, or Tom Bradford, but anyway, the club settled on Mount Pleasant. And so we have an indication then that association football is moving near the St James area, and that was in 1893. So they decided to play one season at a field, the Horse Show Field in Mount Pleasant. Now the following season, 1894, we have the club then decides to rent St James Park, and it was the 6th of October 1894. Exeter AFC played Minehead in what we believe was the first association football game at St James Park. Just a few facts. Exeter were too short at the start of the game. It had to finish early because the Minehead players had a train to catch, and Exeter won 3-0. But the Somerset, it was in the Somerset Press. Clearly the Minehead players were complaining about the grass was too long. It was knee deep in places, apparently. So can we imagine whether or not that was invention? But it's a nice touch anyway. So October 1894, the first association football game here.
And then clubs evolved, so we have Exeter United become the next club to play here, is that right?
Well, that's right, yeah. So 1893, Exeter AFC were formed. They were then reformed in 1896, and it was they really just took a new name. They were going to fold, but they, again, at the Guildhall, had a meeting, an important meeting, and they decided to change the name of the club to Exeter United. That was in 1896. Now, just before they did that, a rugby team was formed in St James's, and they took the field. So even though Exeter Football Club had been playing here, they couldn't use the field in 1896. So they played at Magdalen Road on the training college's ground. So they eventually did move. So that was for a few years. Then Exeter United were playing. They weren't playing here. There was rugby being played here. Exeter United then took the ground in 1900. So continue. Yeah, they took it. Okay, so they took it for 2 seasons, 1900 to 1902. They probably played the last game in February 1902, because in that year, the co-op, as we know it, the co-op society, decided to hold their annual congress here at this ground. And in March 1902, a building was put up on the pitch, huge building, for this congress. Exeter United had no home. They suddenly were without a ground. The congress, the building must have been up for a long time, in fact. So during this congress, there were exhibitions of co-op manufacturers, and so that was the reason for putting this up. The next time the ground was used for football was 1903. But by that time, there was no more Exeter United, and St Sybil's United had become the #1 team in Exeter, the City Club. That's what they were called. They were called the City Club. So that was and they took the ground in August 1903. And St Sybil's, the club, we have been here ever since. So
there's a slight irony, it seems to me, that at the moment, our football club, being a supporter-owned club, is in effect a cooperative organisation. That actually we were formed originally because of the co-op, but because Exeter United played. It
contributed to their downfall. Yeah. Absolutely, most definitely. It's curious. I'm still not sure. They just ceased to appear in the press. Interestingly, some of their officials then joined St Sybil's, then joined Exeter City. But the issue is that Exeter United, if there is a doubt, there is no connection between Exeter United and St Sybil's United.
We'll get back to football in a minute, but we'll do just a couple of little diversions about the use of the land. The first one, and interesting with the co-op, was this actually was used for big political rallies.
Yeah.
Tell us about the ones around the vote, for example.
Yeah, in 1884, there was the Reform Act. So the Liberals produced a franchise bill, and there was a Tory majority in the House of Lords, and that defeated the bill. And there was uproar in the country. I mean, one political commentator, it was the biggest ever political demonstrations in history. I mean, we're talking 1884, the summer and the autumn of 1884. And in October 1884, the Devonshire Reform Movement chose St James Field to hold a rally in support of the bill. And 12,000 people marched from St David's Station to the ground. There were speeches there were 4 platforms put up. I'm just trying to imagine what that must have been like, but there were 4 platforms with speakers, resolutions were passed, and it was, I think it was conducted really well. I mean, certainly in the press, it was one of many nationwide demonstrations, and as a result, subsequently, the bill was passed with amendments, of course, but there we are. Yeah, I mean, the Tories clearly were well, the reason why they didn't want it, because the constituencies with the boundaries would change and they would lose votes. But anyway, it was defeated. It was passed eventually.
So you're also already getting this picture of the multi-uses of this piece of land. We did the Menageries bit of the title, but what about the murder?
The murder, yeah.
I assume we're not talking about sport here.
No, it's so this was in January 1887, and it was early January. It was a Sunday, and a newborn baby was discovered in a parcel, in a packet, at the gate, against the gate of St James Road, dead. It was discovered by a young lad. There were comments in the local, in the reports of the hearing in January stated that it was discovered just before 7 o'clock because the church bell, St James's church bell, had just stopped ringing at 7. Later in the year there was a trial, and a domestic servant went on trial for the murder of the child, and so these tragic circumstances, it happened, and that was January 1887. So
recapping, the building that was put up, was it a wooden structure?
Wooden structure.
Yeah.
There was a wooden structure.
You say a building, you imagine a place across the road, you know?
No, kind of maybe temporary, so it was pulled out, but it was a wooden structure, yeah.
So, obviously in these conferences and that, we've been putting away, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So we've got a series of football teams ending with St Sybil's United, and then they changed their name in 1904 to Exeter City, all playing on just a field with small crowds watching round. But the big decision in the evolution of the club and the ground was the decision to go professional and join the Southern League in 1908.
That's right.
Tell us about what that then meant for the look of the football ground.
Okay, well, what's interesting is because we're talking about grounds, and that's why we're here. That's why we're talking the topic. In 1907, Exeter, the club, had found new land for a ground in the Barnfield area, and there was a project, quite a serious project, because there were plans. There was a grandstand. There was everything. There were clearly that near the bowling club. That was one of the in that area anyway.
That was right there in the big deep pit. City of Exeter booming.
1907. So that was all. That was in 1907. Now, by 1908, those plans fell through, but they were clearly talking at that time about the possibility of the club going professional and joining the Southern League, Division 1. There was a public meeting in February 1908, and that very much in support of the idea. In March 1908, the directors, the committee met in Sybil Street in the Red Line Hotel, and unanimously agreed that the club a limited liability club would be formed, and that the club would apply for membership of the Southern League. After that meeting, architects' plans were presented for the St James Park site. So there was on those plans a grandstand, banking for terracing, dressing. The stated capacity was 15,000. That was in 1908. So the next step was obviously to get elected, and there was a meeting of the Southern League in in May 1908, and Exeter came out top. There was about 5 or 6 teams wanting to join. I think there were 6 teams and 5 got elected. Exeter came in number 1, and so as soon as that was confirmed, work on the ground began at the end of May 1908, and that took about 5 weeks. So the ground was transformed. I mean, from that moment, it would have looked, maybe we could recognise it from the ground that we know today. The grandstand with banking, it was a bank.
The one thing that puzzles everybody, you take the St James's Road down the back in Wells Street, different of height.
Yeah.
I mean, and then the cow shed. Well, I'm going back there, man. They must have dug in to make the pitch level, mustn't they?
There was major work. We have there's a. Maybe I'll pass around the photo, so I do, as a way of illustration. Okay, May 1908. Look at this. This is about the best I can do. Association football in Exeter. You can see horses on the pitch, and you can see all the people that were there. And I'm happy to just pass that around. And that was what was going on in July 1908. And you can, and in answer to your question, I mean there was some serious changes in
pick and shovel, no bulldozers.
That's it. I mean that was taken at the end of May, June 1908. So from that moment, the ground becomes what we know it to be today in terms of accommodation for spectators, dressing rooms for the players. I mean, before that, we know that the players were changing in one of the local pubs. I mean, before games. I mean, that's what happened. But anyway. So 1908, I think, is really important, and the club transformed. It was really an important time for the club.
But there was a problem. Well, there was a problem once we started entering the FA Cup.
Yes.
What was the problem? And
okay, well, amazingly, the FA had regulations about the length of the pitch, and the pitch was deemed to be too short. So in the cup in 1910, 1911, there was a game. I think Nelson played in October, an FA Cup tie, and they refused to play at St James's Park. So that tie was played at the county ground. So clubs were clearly there was an issue there. It had to be addressed. I think at the time, the club. City were trying to negotiate to buy the county ground. That didn't happen, but there were certainly attempts to move to the county ground. And in fact, one of their great supporters was the secretary of Southampton Football Club, and he actually came out in the press and said, well, actually, I think that if Exeter go professional and join the Southern League, they should play at St Thomas because it's a better ground. So he actually stated that publicly, but. So anyway, the local MP, Mr. Duke, Henry Duke, became involved. He persuaded the landowner at the back, behind the big bank, to sell land, and as a result, the pitch could increase in size, and that was for the 1911 season. That was already in order. Okay?
So in 1908, who's owning the field, St James
Okay,
Field?
right. That's a good question. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay, so the Clifford Trust, we're renting it out until about the 1850s, when a local butcher, Tom Bradford, took on the tenancy for years on end. He was then kind of, if you like, replaced by a syndicate of residents, local residents, because they were unhappy with him organising shows and menageries, the noise issue. But what happens, and this was in 1904, so in 1904 the syndicate of local residents took on the tenancy from the trust.
So it's still owned by the
Still owned by the trust, absolutely, yeah. And of course what happens, the shows continue. And Tom Bradford, we have a letter to the press that Tom Bradford writes to the Western Times in 1906, and he's clearly really annoyed, you know. Look, my tenancy came to an end because I was told that there was to be no more menageries, and what happens? They continued these menageries. So residents continued to complain to the local authorities. In 1908 then, Exeter City take on the lease.
The lease.
The lease, Exeter City then lease the ground, and in 1921 the club buys the land. So they're tenants from 1908 to 1921. They took on a 21-year lease of the ground in 1908, yes. Okay, that's a good question.
Well, the club became a limited company, didn't it?
No,
So
okay, no, it was local businesses. It was so. In other words, as part of the support when you're setting up a limited liability company, part of it's engaging the support of local businesses. And at that stage, I think there would have been certainly the meeting there. Certain local businesses had promised to support the scheme. It was known as this project or the scheme to go professional, and as far as I know, that would have been an important source of revenue.
So rather than
The FA. No, I think they gave. I mean, they gave. Well, they certainly gave. They needed to. They gave support because the club. One of the directors, Norman Kendall, went to. He was lobbying. He went to Southampton football club. He went to London to get support for. It all hinged on the club joining the Southern League. I think that's really important as well. But in terms of the finance, I think it was the local businesses.
He lived over there, but he had a greenhouse in Blackpool Road.
Right.
So it's local business, because you've got Mackay.
Mackay as well.
Eventually.
Well, Mackay as well.
I mean, that's how football still runs in a lot of clubs. It's
And then
shareholders putting money in.
Yeah, and then you have the program. You have maybe that was the start of the football the actual program that we buy, and then companies would advertise in that. And
Wasn't Kendall, he was the solicitor or...
Mackay was the solicitor. Kendall was a fascinating character. He was a musician. He was a tailor and a musician. He was a singer, right? Norman Kendall. Yeah.
So a couple of interesting points there. One is that we haven't always owned the ground, so that's interesting to understand that. And secondly, that we haven't played all our matches here. In fact, the county ground was used for the first demonstration game. So Arsenal played West Bromwich Albion 1902. So that was the first time professional football was played in Exeter. And Exeter City actually used it often for their Christmas Day games at the county ground. So we played several games here at county ground, and then we had to play a few FA Cup ties there as well. So it's interesting. Often people think we've all played all our games here. Not quite. Obviously, 1908 we go professional. Suddenly we've got a stadium. I think you can call it that. But of course, it was only 6 years later, World War I. So, what happened to the football club and to the ground when war broke out?
Well, 1914. I think it's important to say that probably the biggest match, if you like, up to the First World War was in January 1914. City played Aston Villa in the FA Cup, second round. Aston Villa were the holders, so it was a huge occasion. I think the crowd was under 10,000, just under 10,000. And perhaps it was the first time that a match was filmed at St James's Park, because there was certainly a cinema operator at the ground. I think it may have been shown in local cinemas. But anyway, that was in January 1914. For the record, City lost 2-1. And unlucky losers, but the press certainly were. One of the leading sports writers was saying, look, 10 years, this is where we're at, you know, incredible. From St Sidwell's in 1904, Exodus, the club changed its name, and now in 1914 we're playing the FA Cup holders.
And topically, to qualify to get through to play Aston Villa, Exeter had in the previous round won 4-0 at Portsmouth. Yes. And many people think it was because of that win that we were invited to tour Argentina, because we suddenly were in the minds
of people. It was profile, absolutely. I agree. Yeah, I think that's a fair point, because it was.
So we've got a lot to thank Portsmouth for our history.
No, so okay. In the run-up to the last game of the season was the last league game was against Plymouth. Was against Argyle here, 11,000. So again, a huge, really big occasion. The next game was in August 1914. So City had been on tour. They come back. War had broken out, and it was a charity. Well, it was a training session, and the proceeds were to a local war charity. Now, as we know, what happened. Well, there was a big movement across the country for actually stopping professional football and putting an end to it, because cricket stopped. A lot of the other sports didn't continue, but people. It was a really controversial, sort of a hot topic, a controversial topic. But professional football did continue. There were 3 professional leagues at that time. There was the Southern League, and there was League Division 2, League Division 1. So Exeter were mid-table, Southern League. So they played the 14-15 season, and then immediately in May 1915, the ground was given over to the voluntary training corps. And the grandstand, this corps set up their offices in the grandstand. On the pitch, there was drilling, there was instruction in rifle shooting, and we know there were charity football games as well. Fred Bailey played in one in December 1915. And finally then, at the end of 1915, there was a shareholders meeting. It was announced that the club had ceased operations for the duration of the war. So effectively, St James Park was no longer a sports ground. It was a military training centre, effectively. And as well, there's a connection then to the beginning where we talked about Lady Anne Clifford. The Clifford Trust also agreed to reduce the rent to a nominal rate for the duration of the war. So that was at that meeting in December 1915.
So thanks so much, Aidan, because that's an amazing amount that's gone on. We just see that little bit of land, and when you think of the pigs, the circuses, the co-op, the political movement, cricket, rugby, cycling, football, and then a wartime cessation. It is a remarkable history of just a plot of land. But one of the things that people often talk about in terms of that plot of land is its name. People still argue about it today, is what is the name and how do you spell it? What various things has it been called, and can we agree on a name now?
Well, I think the thing to remember is that in the 19th century then, why St James? Because of the church. Okay, so from up to 1836 it was called Parish Field. That was the name. It was an important field in St James. So we in the 19th century we had the 3 versions. We had James apostrophe S, we had James apostrophe, and we had James. So the quote that I've just read there was St James Field. So my first point is this has been going on since St James's Church was built and consecrated. So it's never going to be resolved. But St James did exist. I think the club officially, correct me if I'm wrong, but the club used St James today, St James Park. So that's already been used in the 19th century. And I think after that there are moments in history. For example, in the 1910s, the club's headed note paper was S apostrophe. Okay, we can argue about the grammar as well, but I think that's beside the point. I think that from the moment the ground became a football ground, there was a variety of ways of referring to it, and if the club up for St James today, then we know that was used 100 years ago. So,
and of course there are at least two other famous football grounds, well, one famous and one not so famous, that are also called St James's Park, obviously Newcastle United, but also Brackley Town, so they're also St James's Park. Aidan, thank you very much. Any questions? Yes.
If you actually look at all football, the inter-season things, when you get all your new players back 100 years ago, it was football and athletics. So don't forget, they used to do athletics meetings. They had races. They used professionals. The professionals 100 yards, and then you'd have the amateurs 100 yards. So it's been an athletics ground as well.
Yeah. Good point. Any other questions from anyone, or any comments and reflections? Things that they'd like Aidan to research a bit more to.
The thing that always puts me is the actual, slope of that. I mean,
that's getting at you, isn't it, Trevor? Yeah.
I mean, like you say, you play cricket. I mean, if you took a line from the toe shape down, you just knock it that way and roll the boundary line.
You can see it, can't you? You can see the slope.
It would have been good for the meetings.
Oh,
You
yes,
could have been at the mat this end, and then everybody was on sort of crowd down.
I do know my grandfather used to play rugby there, and he used to sort of say they used to go up before the game and clear off all as much as they could of, pig drop on the But and of course the thing that always puzzled me was like Buffalo Bill was actually there. I've always wondered if it was actually true or not,
Well, we'll have to check in the news.
But he said it was, so I mean, I take Grandad's word for it. That's it.
Of course, St James's Cricket Club still exists. I mean, it's now Topsham St James, but the cricket club, and they're quite proud of their history of connection with St James's Park. Any other? Yeah, John.
The line of St James Street was set long before the football practice. Do you know when the road that came up off Oxford?
The road was after the church. The road, St James Road, sorry.
St James Road, it was a lane.
It was a lane.
It's shown on the Ordnance Survey planning, surveyor's drawing in 1800 something. So there must have been some kind of a path along there. Even
There may be a path, but as far as I know, I mean, the area started to be built up. Well, already when the church went up, the church it was a church of ease. That's what it was known as. In other words, to take the load off St Sibyls. So it was at that time it must have been built up around here. But I was understanding that it wasn't actually the road itself was after the church. But you're saying
Well, we'll have a look at that.
Yeah, we'll check.
there's a map in Shapter's book on the cholera that probably will show you.
Okay.
Quite a few of the early cholera cases were at Barnshole Well,
Right.
where the shop was, where the student house is now. And obviously that was all training when they built the railway in 1860. But there are, there's a tide map and all that kind of stuff. So if you want to go back that far, there probably is some map evidence.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's definitely worth checking. Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. Any other?
Just a question, do you have a photo of that massive picture?
No, the reports I've seen have been text, but I would imagine, yes, I would imagine they would have been perhaps front page. It would have been. They were huge. It was a huge event, and the context was national. So Lancashire particularly, the biggest ones were, I think, in Lancashire in the summer. But I imagine that they exist.
Might be worth contacting the co-op history people. Just see if they've got any photos. Yeah, good point. Any other questions? No, well, Aidan, thank you so much. I think we're getting a taste now of the work that Aidan's doing. The products that are going to come from this are at the end of the project, which is roughly next April. We'll be producing a final exhibition and a brochure, and some of Aidan's findings will be in that brochure. And in the exhibition. We're also, the history group are hoping to do a larger book along the style of this one on the history of St James's Park. So that's an idea for a couple of years' time. So I think we're possibly around 2019, because I think that'll be the 125th anniversary of that first game. Extra be Minehead, so that's roughly what we're looking for at the moment. But if anyone else has got any ideas of what we can do around this, there's going to be plenty more events coming up. We've employed a top football photographer to do some fantastic photos of St James's Park, and there's going to be an exhibition of those in November. So there's going to be lots of other events coming up, so watch out for them. But thank you very much for your interest today, and particularly big thank you to Aidan for all the work.